anyhow, we welcome you to the afternoon presentation. This is one of two presentations on DNA that we'll be having today. This is the more advanced version. We'll have a beginner's version later today. So if some of this overwhelms you, just stay with us and you get a better explanation of how to figure out what Tommy has told you, okay? Tommy comes from Texas, and he is playing a role that's very important. He's on the DNA committee, which Larry Vick heads up. And that committee was barren in the sense that it was just Larry there. And so last year, Larry was able to persuade, convince, plead Tommy to come and help him. And so over the last year, he's become more and more of an asset to us at Joseph Vick Family of America and to Larry. And so this is one of several speaking assignments that he's had, but we'll continue on with that. Having said that, Tommy, cousin, seventh cousin,
Something like that. It's
seventh cousin.
well, thank you very much, Galen, for the kind introduction. Again, my name is Tommy Vick. I've done genealogy as long as I can remember. I started with asking questions probably in elementary school somewhere, and that I guess drove my mother to start doing research, and she would drag me around, and I think I helped. I tried anyways back then. This particular story that we're going to start with here is from one my grandmother used to tell me about her grandfather. And generations of genealogists have tried to figure out this story, and it was a brick wall that nobody could overcome, which what led me to get into the autosomal DNA triangulation process. So that's where we're going to start here. The primary example is I'm going to demonstrate how I broke this brick wall with my second great grandparent on my paternal grandmother side, Mildred Carter Vick. Anyways, then the next I'm going to discuss an adoption that took place in 1941 and how that you can approach that through the same process, but a little differently. And then the next is going to be on the an analysis I did for testing the limits for my fourth great grandfather, Edmund Vick. Some of the sources I used and some of the people that I give my gratitude to who kind of paved the way for all this would be, and you can look up Dana Leeds. She talks a lot about on the how to do the autosomal DNA and colorizing your branches and a lot of information there that you can look up if you need to. And Krista Cowan from Ancestry. She's also known as the barefoot genealogist. So we had a short discussion, and she said it's definitely possible to find out who your second great grandfather's parents were, but he had to have children, and then you probably need at least 3 descendants from those children. And he had plenty of children, so I had plenty of descendants of those children to pick from. So we did manage to resolve or discover what was behind that story, which we'll get into more in a bit. Some of the tools used, you can use Ancestry has a lot of new tools that are very helpful in managing your autosomal DNA triangulation process and for those DNA matches, to manage those matches. DNA Painter is another good one. It's a chart we'll get into, and then Excel spreadsheets and charts. And first, I'm going to introduce Richard Edward Carter, which is my second great grandfather. How I did the DNA candidates selection process, then the triangulation process, the organization of that I did of separating all of that data from those DNA matches. How I use visualization of your DNA analysis results using charts and the importance of that, so you can get a good visual mental picture of what you're doing. It's just a lot of information there. how DNA can corroborate, validate, and find new documentation that traditional research was unable to uncover. And I'll get into tweaking the process for different scenarios or problems to solve, and then I'll wrap it up. This here is Richard Edward Carta. It's the story that my grandmother used to tell, and actually all the branches of his children, the descendants of those that told almost the same story with different variations of an Indian massacre. His family, the earliest that we can figure he was born was 1853 up to 1857. And we know he died in 1916. I'll start off with some maps here that shows where the story took place according to family lore. And you can see up here, these are all would be the Comanches. We're going to try to, where they were up in the plains and they would raid according down these lines. That's where they would go and raid. And the story basically was that his family was massacred by Indians near this location, which Los Morris, that there's going to be a fort there, Fort Clark Springs. That's Brackettville, Texas. And Quemado, Texas, and Jimenez, Mexico is about right there. And that's where they would come through this area. And supposedly his family was in a wagon train in that area. The Lord knows why they were there, but or anybody would be there, because it was a no man's land. And I'll get into that a little more later too. But supposedly the only survivor was him. He was hidden in the bushes by his mother, according to the story. And a Mexican family came along on the trail, found him crying, took him to Mexico. He later ran away and ended up back up at Fort Clark Springs in Brackettville, which is at Los Morris Spring, which is why they put the fort there. Don't remember what Los Morris means. Somebody might look that up. It's a Spanish word, but I speak Spanish, but don't remember anyways. So the big story, all just in that area right there is where it takes place. Okay. It's not progressing. Roger. Just click on this mouse pad here and get it to move.
Alex looked it up. It means the blackberries.
The blackberries. Thank you, Alex. No, where's pipe? So what I'm gonna do, hit with this, okay. All right.
It's Spanish.
Yeah. Could be. Anyways, here's another map. It shows Republic of Mexico. This was disputed territory. This was the Nueces Strip in here. That's the name that's evolved because the disputed territory was between the Nueces River and the in this case Rio Colorado or Rio Grande River. So that was no man's land. You had all kinds of desperados in there, and just a lot of comancheros and other different names for just a lot of people doing bad things to each other in those areas. And after the Civil War, you had a lot of bandits in that area too, and so not to mention the Indians, and so there's just a lot of bad things happening. So this just kind of adds credibility to his story, trying to validate that story and find some written proof of that story. But here's another map that shows, Fort Clark that I was talking about, and between all of that was Fort Duncan and the old cattle trails. And it's a little different perspective of that. Here's another picture of him and his grandson, James Carter Ussery. So this story even made it into the Valverde County Historical Society book. And it talks about the story that I just mentioned, so it's there for forever, I guess. List all of his children in there as well. So, and then a brief description of the story. He then married Elizabeth Vick, and trying to add more credibility to the story. This is what happened to her brother and his children. It says in late April of 1866. Now this story is documented in the state archives, and it's in the books, Indian Papers of Texas. It's like a 8-volume set or so. Anyways, in late April 1866, Martha, Tom Beckett, and 3 children, ages 4, 2, and 1, made a trip in late April of 66 to Brackettville. On the way, they stopped overnight at a neighbor's house. Late that evening, they heard a rooster crowing, which was a bad omen. He's going to roost. The host warned them that this was a bad omen and begged the family to stay over. Martha said she didn't believe in those omens, and the next morning they started out on down the road to Brackettville. They were only about 24 years old and had no idea they were in such danger. They had gone only a few miles when they were ambushed by Indians on April 28 of 66. It seems Tom put up a good fight, and this is, folklore, so we don't know. It's passed down, so how much of this is really accurate or not, but we can believe it happened. But there were too many Indians, so during the fight, a bullet hit one of the old campfire skillets, and from what I'm understanding here, the Indians then took that, after they killed him, they took the skillet handle and dispatched the children and the wife. So this is covered in the Texas Indian paper. It's a 5-volume set of books included in the papers, letters, and reports sent to the governor of Texas on the Indian depredations concerning life and property. So these would have gone through Texas Rangers and other city officials who were collecting data for the governor on losses of livestock, cattle, lives, things that were going on. So not everything was recorded though, and there was a lot of Texas Rangers mentioned they would come across settlements while people were settling in that area. I don't know, but they come across burned out settlements. They had no idea who was living there and what happened to them. So anyways, then there's another story which I tried to tie into Ed Carta. And there's just nothing about the story he was passing down. His wife had one, we could verify that. But this is John Charles Beals. He acquired 8 million acres from Mexico on the Rio Grande River in that location that they're showing there. And he brought in 59 refugees who were recruited from the slums of New York, and he tried to make a settlement there in March of 1834. By March of 1836, the remainder of the settlers abandoned the settlement out of fear and lack of hope of making anything out of the harsh land. This was 4 days after the fall of the Alamo. They were traveling to Texas, colony of San Patricio, when they were overwhelmed by a war party of about 400 Comanches east of the Nueces River. The captives that were not useful were killed and the rest sold into slavery, which a more detailed story tells of them taking them accounts into Mexico and selling, the women and children into slavery there. And they kept some, took one woman's account that she was purchased from them, from the Comanches, or from a Mexican that had purchased them from the Comanches. Or I forget, there was some kind of negotiations there, and she accounts seeing her sons being taken and riding off with the Comanches back up to the plains. This was the last time she ever saw her sons. And I guess she died of grief shortly after that anyways. Though there was 18 years between when this happened and the earliest date I can place Ed Carta's birth. So this is in the same location. I really can't, this was probably still fresh in people's minds when he was born and still talking about it. So when I get to the real story that I discovered, this is probably the story he created his story from. We'll get there. So it's very unlikely that there's an 18-year, you just can't make up 18 years for him to even put there. This is that same story written by Barty Hill, historian. This week in Texas history, he writes for various newspapers and puts in historical articles. And here, his title is Colonizer Takes the Slum Refugees to Hell on Earth. So there's another description. So anyway, so now we get into the genetic genealogy part of it. That story is why I got into this and started trying to discover who his parents were, which we could find nothing. This is a definition given by that Family Tree magazine is genetic genealogy. Triangulation mirrors the process used by surveyors who employ multiple triangles to help deduce the exact landscape of a particular area. And in genealogy terms, this genetic genealogists create triangles to form groups of 3 autosomal DNA matches to get a better picture of how each member of the group is related to each other. The term triangulation equals Ancestry's shared match function. So I may use those interchangeably, triangulation and shared match. Oh. So here's a demonstration of triangulation. You can use yourself and your best match, and you would do the shared match function, triangulation to get the shared match or matches. You could get multiple matches in the C section there. Or you can use 2 best matches and triangulate a shared match function between A and B to get the C. A best match is somebody that you would be as genetically close or generationally as close to the person of interest here, which is Ed Carta. So I want to try to find the oldest possible person living that's related to him or descended from him, where you get the best benefit out of your autosomal DNA, which will bring in older matches and more matches from the past. Where you wouldn't want to do your grandkids or something like that. You would do yourself or grandparents or somebody, as oldest person you can find, whoever you can get. You don't want anybody who's going to have, I guess, endogamy, cross relations between lines where they may be related, two direct lines of where their second cousins had married from 2 different lines or something like that. You want to try to avoid matches like that if possible. Okay, we're going to move on to a chart after this, which better explains what I have here. But you have triangle. I'm going to show you how to distribute triangulation between all the AB DNA donors. This isolates all the AB side of the family from all other DNA matches. Going to color code those matches accordingly as you do it in Ancestry. We'll go over that too. Triangulate the AB DNA donors with the B DNA donors, and I'll show how to do that. It's just a way to isolate the since in this case I'm doing the paternal side. We want to isolate the maternal side DNA matches and remove them from the picture so that we're only looking at the DNA matches from the A paternal side, which greatly simplifies your research when you have to start going into the trees. So that we talked about as I'm excluding the B matches and then sort the A. Theoretically, you should now have only the A side remaining. is this chart, hopefully clears up a little what I just said. You have, Carta as A side and B side. So their children are going to be a combination of A, B. All of their children and grandchildren and so on down the line are all going to be a combination of A, B. And then, then their spouse is C, then you're going to add in a combination of C, which is not really important, but it just kind of demonstrates kind of what I'm doing here. In this case, we know what the B side is. We know who her Elizabeth Beckett's, we know who her parents are and grandparents, or just her parents. But anyways, we know who her siblings are and so forth. But on the A side, we know nothing. Absolutely nothing. So that's what we're trying to discover. And that's why we kind of want to separate the B matches from the A, because these will not have A because they're only related to you through the siblings of B. And we want to find those who are only the siblings, if there are any, of A. And they would fall in from back over here somewhere. Anyway, so I've got DNA donors or matches that I'm going to use to triangulate with. Does that make sense? Well, okay. And then you can color code them in Ancestry using different colors to distinguish the matches as you get them in, so you know the difference, where those matches belong. And in Ancestry, you can put notes in there what this color code is, and so when you go back in there, you can remember, oh, this code, I did this with this triangulation. And then how once you run the triangulation, then you'd run a triangulation between your donors here, the direct descendants of A and B. You'd run that triangulations with the unknown descendants of just the B side. And when you do that triangulation, that's going to bring up only the relations to the B side. It will also bring up some unknown ABs who are descendants inside here. And you're going to eliminate those too, because you're probably you know their information and history if you've done a lot of research. So then you can give that a special color code, knowing that once you do that triangulation between the ABs and the Bs, and once you give them a special color, then you can isolate that color from Ancestry, and it shows you the A side. And all this takes time. Is everybody following me so far? Everybody falling asleep? Okay, so now you've isolated all those matches, you got them down. And how are we going to organize all these separated matches? You're triangulating, color code them. And so now we do with all these combined matches. We're going to go through and we've gone through and identified the A side matches and separated those. We're going to start visiting the trees then of your DNA matches and look for common ancestors between them all, and make notes in Ancestry to common names. And this is a gradual process. You got to get familiar with all these individual trees, and hopefully there's some good trees there. You may have to build somebody's tree out to find out where the common ancestor is. And then the key part of this is copying all these usable matches into a spreadsheet. So you can work out of a spreadsheet through a link. And that way you can just click on it, it goes to the tree, automatically opens up Ancestry. You go through the trees, and you go back to your spreadsheet, make notes, and you can build out a kind of a lineal tree there, and then start organizing those matches as how they fit together. And it's a gradual process, but eventually you will recognize the common ancestors in those trees. If you don't know what name you're looking for, it could take a little while, because in this case we had a name change. So we didn't even know any names as well. On the maternal side, we had no idea. The paternal side, there was a name change. So, but anyways, you can also, a good idea is to do what Ancestry, and I think Krista Cowan and them call You can just build a quick and dirty tree. I do both. This is where good genealogy research practices are important. And also a key thing is to make the tree private, because it's a process in the works, and you don't want people getting in there and assuming that this is all accurate and start copying what you're working on without knowing it's not right. So quick and dirty trees, quick on that is it's not going to be perfect genealogical research, because you're just going to go through and you're doing the bare basics to take the line back and trying to figure out what's going on. You can always go back and fill in gaps. You're also kind of assuming that the people who've done research on the trees you're looking at have done it right. But you can always go back and clean that up. The idea is just to figure out where we're going and to get a good idea where we're going. And this is what they recommend to do as well, because you're spending so much time anyways, building so many other people's trees just to figure out. It's very time consuming. So, but don't get in a hurry, because it's going to take what it takes. I've talked into visualization of your findings using charts. There's a paid charting system services. I like Charting Companion. There may be better ones out there, but Charting Companion worked well for me. I saw in John's presentation, he used some charts that look very similar, some of these drop-down charts, but you're just not going to get the charts you need in some of these, just in your basic Ancestry tree charts. And I'll show an example of that here later too, of how this can help you build a family tree lineage chart using a lot of endogamy. So where you have multiple grandparents in the same different trees or lines. Anyways, family group sheets is another way, options just to use in these family group sheets within your family tree program. With DNA, I use a DNA icon that I put in the photo, so I can say, hey, I've this branch of this family through these siblings, I have identified DNA match directly to that sibling. And you build those up, and it gives you a good visualization of gradually of how you're fitting into that family, since you don't really know. It's just you're building blind, but the picture starts to emerge as you building this family tree based on the DNA matches. Use the charts to help you evaluate the CMs and visualize the range of relation. It also helps you know where your ancestors are going to fit into the tree. Get the right centimorgans in there. So this is kind of what it looks like when I start, because I'll just go in there after I've done the triangulation, the shared match function. You'll just get a long list of matches. Then I just copy these matches and I paste them into a spreadsheet. And then I start organizing them here like this. And these would be the links. I like to leave those because it tells me how big their tree is. This gives me the range and the centimorgans. I like to keep that and put information. And then I'll take notes, and then I'll start building out the tree on the rest of these cells here on out. So that's very, very basic rudimentary beginnings. That is time consuming and tedious also. But once you get it set up, it becomes helpful. And this is kind of what it ends up with after you're done. It helps to start with this in the beginning before you start pasting anything in. You paste it in the right row, and then you start building out these trees, and you start seeing the common ancestors and how they fit into what group they fit under. These are different siblings. So you're saying, well, okay, wow. So I'm getting multiple matches from different siblings under the same, third great grandparents. So I had no idea who the Weavers were. But I'm also related to them from all these matches and all these same siblings. They go back to, this would be Frederick Weaver. And I think that's a son, but he goes to Frederick Weaver, and might show that here in a bit. And here's another way of charting it to give you a visualization is showing a Frederick Weaver and his wife Martha Rye. This is important as well because then you can chart here in which children you've had matches from. In this case, I had 8 matches at these various CMs, 4 matches here, a match here. I had a match here, here, and so on and so forth. And through each one of these, he had a lot of children. So over here would be a different branch from like uncles and things. So you're even maybe branching in past Frederick Weaver and past Martha Rye there. So I'm also getting some Rye matches and some Weaver matches from his brothers and her brothers and sisters, so forth. So that it kind of shows even and gradually you can, by the centimorgans, you can tell, well, I'm not going to fit in, which once you know you're Rye, you're also got autosomal DNA with Rye, you know you're going to fit into this section here. Because you're getting DNA from matches from both sides. So it's kind of like that AB. So you know you're going to be AB into there. And you follow the centimorgans. This one was a different group I found, Lucy Peacock, Weaver Peacock. She's going to be one of those unknown children that was not in this group. Well, I put her in there, but nobody had any information on here, and I'll show you in a bit what I think is going on there. But she apparently fits in there, and I'll show that family tree how she fits in. All this. Anyways, I found Lucy's was a peacock because the first information we find on her. Her husband was a peacock, so we don't know her maiden name. But we know she had 3 children. And I have multiple donors from these children to support that. The centimorgans support half sibling to my second great grandfather, Ed Carta, that would have introduced in the beginning. So here I've most likely found his mother and a half sibling, John Calvin, Millie, Statira. We have several matches from Statira and so on and so forth. There's Ed Carta. Let's see. So it says here, I have multiple descendants of 5 different children of Ed Carta were used to match the DNA with the peacock half-sibling descendants. Anyways, so this was an interesting find, saying, well, he did have siblings. He had a mother. And there's a tree chart. You can visualize a little better. Name's Alfred Peacock. I then found a marriage certificate where Lucy Ann Peacock married Richard G. Carta. I'm like, well, that's too big of a coincidence. There are 2 Richards. So you find Edward Carta and Richard G. Carta. And then here's another way to use the family. I used the Ancestry just to show how many different DNA matches from different children linked to Frederick Weaver and Martha Rye. And then this would be his parents over here, and had DNA matches going to 4 different siblings of Frederick Weaver. This is Ancestry's DNA screen. For those who aren't familiar with it, you can do groupings in here. You want to see the matches in a certain way. That's a way to, I think you can put your colors through there as well. I only want to see these certain matches. Or you can do, if you want to do a manual search, which I can get into later on, if you're doing something more further back and really not getting anything through the triangulation process, you may just want to do either a tree search, a name search, or a shared DNA search. So this is a good one to use because you want to see the public trees. Private trees really aren't going to help you. Unlinked trees might help you, but if you have enough matches, or if you have the time, you may want to go through each unlinked tree and see if they're any good. It's time consuming because it's extra steps you have to take to see unlinked trees. But if you got a lot of public trees, go through those first, isolate them, go through those first. If you don't have any information or you have very little information, there's various reasons why you would get little information. You may want to contact some of the private trees. But if you have enough public trees, you may not need to go through all those extra steps. So here, if you want to just see the distant matches or the close matches, depending what you want to do, depending on how far back you're trying to go with this, second great grandparents, this could get rid of all of those ABs, your sisters, your brother, whoever else is tested. You don't really want to see them in the returns. So that's one way to isolate and see just those matches you're interested in from the 6 to 20 centimorgans. And this one gives you up a lot higher, or just all matches. But anyways. Okay, here's that marriage certificate between that we found between Richard J. Carta and Lucy Peacock in the state of Mississippi in Itawamba County. They also made the census in 1850. Now the problem was is Ed Carta was not on there. So they married on the 6th day of September 1848, Itawamba County. With the name, it was indexed under the name Carter. And that's one reason that the marriage certificate remains probably undiscovered for a long time. But you can clearly see in most of these that it is an A. The ER looks like an A so often, then they make that E and then hook that R into one line right into the top of the E. And it looks like an A. But anyways, the census here, you can see R.G. Carta and Lucy and all of her 3 children, John C., Francis, and Statira. Statira is very helpful because it's such an unusual name. It helps us link her later into the 1860 census here. And I got Statirna. Then you see Ed. The Carta family never found this census because it's such horribly written, and they went by McCarty. That looks like McCarty. Anyways, but the Peacock family, once I was talking to them, they never made this connection because these Peacock children are under the name Carta. So once I contacted them and told them what I found, it all kind of fit together for both families. And these other names down here end up fitting into the family members and up through other the fan club. So this was a great find because this put me back from I think 1870 was the earliest we had, or 1880. And now we have Ed Carta as a child at 7 years old. Without the DNA, this would still be very debatable. But with the DNA between the Peacocks and so forth, so this was a great documentation to support the DNA and vice versa. It's really hard to do this with just DNA. You really need the documentation to support it. But you get enough DNA matches, well, we're going to place Lucy in here. We're going to have to do it with just DNA. Getting dry throats again. This is just a document from one of the Peacock descendants. Actually gave me her research, stating the difficulties of the death of of John Peacock, her first husband, and then making her children orphans, and then how after she married R.G. Carta, Richard G. Carta, that became very controversial. Apparently, he never had and was never previously married that we know of, never had any other children, and she suspects he was biracial. I did not know that at the time, and I kind of thought maybe there were other reasons, but I don't. From what she can tell, she never doesn't think the children ever received the inheritance from their father. So they moved to Texas right after that. She was in Texas, as you saw, by 1860 without her husband. So he had died somewhere between Itawamba County, Mississippi, and Texas. Okay, this is where it starts getting controversial, because DNA reveals a different parallel story to the Indian massacre. As you saw, which we saw in the 1860 census, Lucy, well, we didn't see, but she lived near Brothers in Bastrop County, Texas, with her son, Ed Carta. And I should touch on that as the families, the different branches, descendants today, they still pronounce the name Carty. So when we ask them how to spell it, or you get specific, they say, oh, it's Carta. But if they're just talking in, just common, they say, oh, the Cardis this, the Cardis that. But when you get specific with them, that's the Cartas, C-A-R-T-A. But so the Carty wasn't, I don't know why the Mac, I can't explain the Mac. It could have been the census taker making that assumption, I don't know. There's a lot of controversy then about the name Carta sounding Spanish, and they're in Texas. So that could be why they picked up Carty, wanting to be stereotyped as Hispanic at that time. Anyways, I did doing the research. I showed you all those siblings. One sibling stood out. 1861 compiled service record draws attention to Lucy's brother, James Washington Weaver. He served on the Texas frontier at Fort Clark Springs. So that really drew my attention, saying, hey, there's somebody else in Brackettville or Fort Clark Springs that I know now that I'm related to somehow. So, and most likely at this point, it's going to be an uncle to Ed Carta. But then I keep digging and I find that 1868, James Washington Weaver commits murder of an emancipated enslaved person, newly emancipated slave person by the name of Anthony Knowles. This era was still during Reconstruction, so Texas is under military law. The U.S. Army military take over and place him in the stockade in Austin. So he was arrested by the local authorities and jailed, but due to sham courts and non-sympathetic persons, military, possible cases of that happening, military took over the case. And he was, I think, transferred to Austin, the best I could tell. This made the newspapers across the country. I could have looked outside the country, but it made it from New York all the way west. This was in the newspapers. And it became a very big test case for the Attorney General. So there's letters written by the Attorney General between the President of the United States, even getting involved in this to determine, because there was contention, how can the federal government really step in on a civilian trial and take over in a civilian case. So this was a test case of when can the government get involved in a civilian matter. He was sentenced to hang by a military commission. These papers can be found in the Library of Congress, detailed from the Attorney General, detailed transcripts of the trial, who testified, so on and so forth. However, he escapes from Fort Clark. But they go ahead with the trial without him. He was busted out of the stockade by a young accomplice. I contacted descendants of James Washington Weaver, and I guess his family over time softened the story to not make their great-great-grandfather looked so bad. They told a whole different story, which I'll skip at this time. It's not really important. But this, I do get the young accomplice from them. And this young man that he since passed, he was younger than me, but he since had a heart attack and passed. He gave me this information. My brother actually went to school with him. We had no idea. And we had shared DNA, history, genealogy. So when I gave him the true story, he's like, yeah, my family definitely made themselves, try to make themselves look better. Anyways, he escaped from Fort Clark. The young accomplice, I can only guess, but considering the stories are very parallel between the Indian massacre and between this here, I'm assuming the young accomplice is going to be Ed Carter. He would have been about 15 at the time. This is his uncle. And they flee to Jimenez, Mexico, which is right across from Quemado, Texas, which is where the Indian massacre that the story told took place. And it's right down that creek. It runs from Los Moras, as you saw on the map, runs right down to Jimenez, near Jimenez, Mexico, and Quemado. So there's a lot of interesting parallels here. Eventually, they return to Kinney County, Texas. They all return and show up about 1870. But Weaver's living on the lam. He's running from the law. He's changed his name to Taylor. There's been some books written on James Taylor. There outlaws in the area. Weaver's on the dodge and gets in with them. One author says that James Weaver never existed. It was all James Taylor, but I got evidence that he's wrong in his book. But there definitely was a James Weaver and a James Taylor who were interchanging names all the time. This is also where the Beckett family comes in, because where C.L. Sonneshan, he was a professor from the University of Texas in El Paso, wrote a book called The Outlaw Billy Mitchell, where he mentions Ed Carter and the Becketts. But his mention of Ed Carter is brief, but you can see the way he kind of wrote it, that I know there's a story here, but I just don't know what it is. But he talks about Calamise Beckett, which was Ed Carter's father-in-law, and Eliza Jane McInturf, his mother-in-law, mentions them, is living in that no man's land at a ranch there, and they would provide provisions to these outlaws as they came through. Who knows, were they in with the outlaws, or they were just trying to stay out of it and, yeah, we'll give you food and water when you're coming through. Yeah, just leave us alone, or we're, like we're Scottish living on the fringes, and they probably weren't too happy with the, as the history shows, that's why they lived on the fringes. They didn't trust the English, but I don't know, and we never know, I guess, what their involvement was other than supporting these outlaws as they came through. But maybe that's how Ed Carter met Elizabeth Beckett. Maybe he was one of them riding with them. I don't know. But he did isolate himself from his Weaver family completely after this. Never shows any connection. He moves off into this no man's land himself, never goes back to Bastrop. He did name his first daughter Lucy, which is another indicator that, that he actually did know who his mother was, unlike the story he told to his descendants. So he may have told it to, maybe he told the story to Lucy, but there was a lot of early deaths in that family, and they lost most of any oral histories that may have been passed down. Anyways, so the story is he actually returns to Kinney County under fictitious names and becomes a scout for the cavalry. So he's running around the country looking for himself. So he's trying to help them find themselves. So, so they're both back in Kinney County, and he marries Elizabeth Beckett when he gets there. And I covered that. Now, this is one newspaper clipping where it says the president has set aside the action of a military commission at Austin, which tried James Weaver of Bastrop County, which is more central Texas, the map shows, far west Texas. That's Bastrop's near Austin, in the center of the state. He was charged with killing a Negro man and sentenced him to be hung. The advertiser says the papers in the case have just been received containing the president's order that Mr. Weaver be remanded to civil authorities of Bastrop County for trial. He never was.
President would that have been?
Good question. I wish I would have refreshed my memory on that, but I don't remember who it was. I remember the Attorney General was Hoar, Hoar.
What year would that have been?
It started in 1868 with the crime. And so was it still Grant?
I think it was Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson?
Yeah.
So I'm like, my goodness, I found a bigger story than the one I was trying to prove, I was like, not so sure. It's one of those where your genealogy, what was it, the code of where you need to tell it, be the truthful and tell how it is. It's part of his code of ethics.
Yeah.
So it's not something you can cover up. You just need to own it and go with it.
It was great, 1697.
Yeah.
Oh, so at least Anthony Knowles has a name. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much more on him because he died before 1870, and which would have been the first census he would have made on his own. So, anyways. Now let's talk about the other side of the DNA matches. This was all the Weaver side, his mother's side. So Lucy Weaver, I managed to trace her back to South Carolina, but there was just nothing coming back. It's like the matches took up probably over 80% of the matches came back to Weaver families or the Rye families or that side of the family. Whereas Richard G. Carta, I received matches that would have been on that A side, but they were such a small groupings. It was hard to really see how they fit together, and there were different groupings. Just wasn't enough there. I'm still building on that. Maybe something will come to light. So that's why I turned to Y DNA now. Let's get some of my male descendants from Carter to do the Y DNA. And this is where the irony comes in, because the Y DNA is EM2. It's African American. And according to and there was a name change from Carter to Carter. So it was, probably did originate with Carter. I'm still working on those. I've narrowed down the location, and this is the book that comes in very handy that talks about the Carters. It's Free African Americans of North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina. And from the colonial period up to about 1820. So last year when we were in Colonial Williamsburg and doing our conference there was some reason I was attracted to the Randolph House. I found that very fascinating. And then the lady told a story there. And this is I was just learning about the Carters doing the research. And she tells, and I'm trying to wrap my mind out because marriage was illegal. So I was trying to wrap my between races at the time. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around how did the African-American white DNA get into that branch. And I know I was talking to Stephanie, and she's saying same thing about how did my mitochondrial DNA become Celtic or the Irish or something. But anyways, so anyways, this tour guide, so she told a story about Moses Carter jumping the broom with an indentured servant. So their children would have been a mixture of that. And I'm guessing from there, depending on what side of the fence, for lack of a better description, they went on, whether those children ended up being more white or more black, and how they ended up being married and becoming, what side of the tracks, they ended up being on. It could have had a lot to do with their skin tone. So those children, I think would have been free after that, being born to a free person, even though an indentured servant. So apparently unions were allowed between enslaved people and indentured servants or what have you. Some of those groupings, I know that on the census, it said that Richard G. Carter, it's recorded that he was born, and his parents, I think, were born in North Carolina. And so the DNA matches, a lot of them that I have will, at least I've been able to isolate an area here in the counties surrounding. As you can see here, Sampson, Robeson, Duplin counties. So using the DNA, I've managed to at least know an area within the county to search, to focus my search. I know there's one of Moses Carter's descendants, according to the book. And they end up, I think, I think, she told earlier that this was a safe haven for African Americans leaving Virginia, coming down into North Carolina. I know Robeson County has the Lumbee Indian tribes. There was a lot of intermixing there with the Lumbee Indians and free persons of color. So, but anyways, one of Moses Carter's descendants ended up here. And I don't know that I'm going to ever be able to prove how he's going to tie into the Carter family there, but at least I have a story to tell of supported by some DNA. We'll keep working that. Okay, enough on that story. I'm going to move into the adoption, a case that worked in San Antonio in 1941. And then I'll give another brief explanation of the Vicks, how I used the descendants of Edmund Vick, my fourth great grandparents, the descendants of him and triangulated them, just testing the limits of the autosomal DNA and how that worked out for me. But so changing gears here. This is Lou has since passed away. She was born on her birth certificate. We had the records unsealed as Anita Webster. There was just traditional research turned up nothing. I could just manage to disprove everything that what little did turn up. So we turned to the DNA. She took a DNA test, and there were absolutely no Websters in her DNA matches. So you can use those surname functions, searches, and just do a quick search of her DNA matches, and there was just no Websters in there. So I'm like, well, she wasn't a Webster. Then we look at her adoption, the actual adoption papers, and she signs her name as Anita Truitt. So Anita ended up being true. Truitt ended up being half-truth. Because she wasn't a Truitt either. But Lou did have a lot of Truitts in her family line, excuse me. And I was able to build a floating tree, a ghost tree, what have you, that because I didn't know how it linked to Lou, but I started building a tree out, just floating in there and going mostly sideways. Most of your matches are going to be distant matches, and you're going to be able to build that floating tree for these distant matches, and somewhere in there, you will be able to figure out who her great-grandparents are, or great-great, depending on how far back you get. By the way, I showed earlier from the A side and the B side, you want to look for DNA matches that go to the spouse maternal side, so that you can know that this is definitely going to be some kind of grandparents here. However many greats, you're not sure yet because you haven't traced it all the way down to Lou. So, but we do know that this is going to be a second grade, a third grade, or something like that, based on the centimorgans. So then you start building a tree, and then at that point, you're going to start moving down with it and researching the different children of that, and just keep working it down to the present, which it demonstrates here. I found one of the first ones I found was Enoch Grisby. And Priscilla Haynes, I quickly moved that down to Wiley P. Here and Sarah Elizabeth Grigsby. It'd be Wiley P. Truitt. So I had DNA matches on both sides, the A side and the B side. So I could confirm this was going to be one of her grandparents of however many greats. So then focus on those children. You want to do the same thing in these children. You want to look for DNA matches for each one of the maternal spouses to see which one is going to be the next level of grandparents. So in this case, it was she was related to the Sheets. I found being able to confirm the Sheets family was linked in, and then found the marriage between Robert E. Truitt and Catherine Sheets, right down to Lou. And this is the name I kept skipping over because it's a common name, the most common name in genealogy, Smith. But Ancestry DNA, what was it called back then, Larry? The web? It wasn't, they had the web instead of the, what it is called today, but it kept telling me that this web showing me, are you related, Lou's related to all these Smiths? So maybe I better pay attention to Smith. And sure enough, it was right. So I started building that other part of the tree between Thomas Wesley Smith and Edna Jane James. I did the same thing, except I ran into a hitch here with Taylor. She was related to Taylor, but there wasn't enough centimorgans. There was a lot of centimorgans there. It's just short of being a grandparent there. And I was trying to put a square block into a round hole with this. And, and I verified it with DNA matches from our Taylors back here. So I never did really go back and figure it out, but there were Taylors on the paternal side. And I think this is one of those endogamy things where, somewhere in the past, her paternal side married into the maternal side. But what I missed was Jewel Austin Smith's second marriage. I had his first marriage and not his second marriage, not his first. So once I found that, it all fell together. And it was her grandparents ended up being Jewel Austin Smith and Ola Mae Jones. So I go from the most common to the second most common name in genealogy. Then I find that I got her family to open up. The DNA wasn't making sense. I was getting names from Campbell, but she was obviously not related to Campbell's except that specific one. And there are other names there because there were 3 daughters. Well, once I got the family to open up, come to find out that during the pandemic of their time, Ola Mae was a nurse up in the panhandle of Texas, Lubbock, I think, and she caught the flu and she died, leaving Jewel Austin Smith with 3 little girls aging from about 1 to almost 6. And Juanita, which is where the Anita comes from, was the oldest. Well, he dropped off one girl at the neighbor's door. He took the other girl and gave her to a family at the church, which was the Campbell family. And she took that name, Campbell, which is not her genetic name. Same, the girl that was left on the doorstep took on the last name of the neighbors, which was not a genetic name. So the DNA matches that I'd get would be very specific, if not that many. So it's hard to figure out. And I think he took Juanita to the orphanage, which was common at that time. There was a big orphanage in Texas. And what was this? Was this around the Depression era? But so she was raised in an orphanage. And anyways, it's made it very difficult to figure out. Here's the DNA painter. This is one way you can work out your centimorgans. You can now just put in the centimorgans and it will give you all the range of different relations that are possible from that amount of centimorgans. So it's not going to be it gets more exact the closer the relation, but the further relation, the more possibilities there are. But it is very accurate. Anything outside of those possibilities is, I would, as I learned in over there with the Taylors, you don't want to try to fit that square block in a round hole. But this is just, you aware of that. It's available online. This is another DNA detectors autosomal chart. That gives you the same percentages and possibilities of the different relationships based on the centimorgans. Yeah, I don't think my the other part didn't save. So I had another graph, unless the wrong one was opened. This is a chart missing that I put in last night. So did you see two possibly on there, Roger? You didn't? Okay. Well, as I discussed earlier on the Vick line, I decided to do this same process on my fourth great grandfather, Edmund Vick, and his wife, Elizabeth Threadgill. I wanted to see the test limits. As you remember, Ed Carter was my second great grandparent. So I'm going back 2 more generations with the autosomal DNA. What I discovered was all of the A and B sides were the distance relations was going to be too great. Ancestry cuts you off at 20 centimorgans. So anybody I'm related to on the A and B side are most likely going to be less than 20 centimorgans. It could have been 18, 19, or down to 9, 5, I guess, centimorgans. But they will not return when you do a shared match function or that triangulation. So you're not going to get any results back. So that was kind of testing the waters with that. But what you will get is the ABs, which would be any unknown or known children of Edmund and Elizabeth. They will all show up. And that's how I found 3 daughters to Edmund that had not been previously known by most researchers. I think John had recently found I was just there. But anyway, he found one of the daughters. Abbott, yeah, Abbott, the Abbott family. So who I visited there and made some good friends when I was in North Carolina and discovered where she was buried in their cemetery. So then there was that explained the Vick cemetery having the Treadaway family buried in half the cemetery. There was his daughter's family. So we were always kind of curious why the Treadaways were there. Then there was the Sasser family. That was the other daughter, and they were none of these 3 daughters were mentioned in the will. The will did reference, that his property would be sold and divided as he to the children that hadn't been already given to, but it didn't discuss who those children were. Then we found the document of the sale of that property, and then it mentioned the Treadaway daughter, the Sasser daughter, and the Abbott daughter. So that was supporting the DNA. So lessons learned there is that, about the 4th great grandparents, that's about as far as you can go with the triangulation process. I understand Ancestry is at some point is trying to get a better, improve the system on reading the autosomal DNA so that they can accurately release, so you can do the triangulation for DNA further back than 20 centimorgans. Don't dismiss it, because there are good matches with good trees that are going to be 18, 19, 16, what have you, centimorgans beyond 20. So you may have to do a manual search like I showed earlier there. And using those search functions, just search for last names and you can build a list again. And I used Excel. So anyhow, that pretty much sums it up. Any questions, or, if you need any guidance on this or want any documentation, I didn't print anything out, but if there's anything you want, feel free to contact me. I hope I didn't go over, but,
No, you're fine. So any questions whatsoever? Tommy? Tommy, thank you very much.
thank you.
A really interesting